On the morning of August 3, 2026, Donald Trump steps off Air Force One and tells reporters he has just called off a massive military strike. His reasoning: Iran has agreed to negotiate a historic deal. Major news networks immediately broadcast the breakthrough. But a few hours later, a spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry stands before a podium in Tehran and issues a flat denial. We are not currently negotiating with the United States. Mathematically, both statements cannot be true. One party is describing a diplomatic victory, the other is denying that any conversation even took place. This contradiction follows a predictable, repeatable pattern. Understanding this sequence reveals how the United States is being systematically outmaneuvered through its own strategic habits. This pattern functions as a rigid four-step system. It's the framework that governs every major standoff between Washington and Tehran. Step 1 begins with a maximalist ultimatum. The U.S. threatens an attack larger than anything seen since World War II, causing oil markets to spike as analysts weigh the risk of actual escalation. Step 2. Iran holds its position. They offer no concessions, they keep the shipping lanes closed, and they wait for the next move. Step 3. America's Gulf allies, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, call Washington directly. They have trillions of dollars in exposed energy infrastructure and nowhere to hide if a regional war begins. They pressure the U.S. to stand down. Step 4. The United States backs away from the military option, but frames the retreat as a diplomatic achievement, claiming an understanding was reached. This cycle has now run 10 separate times. With each repetition, the tactical expectation of an American follow-through consistently diminishes, as adversaries increasingly calculate for a retreat as the most likely outcome. The Iranian military has now publicly admitted that they use every one of these ceasefire periods to secretly import equipment, repair defensive systems, and rearm their missile arsenal for the next confrontation. On the physical map, the scope of the threat has expanded. Iran has moved beyond a single waterway to squeeze 3 of the world's most critical maritime chokepoints simultaneously. The first is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has exercised de facto control here since February, holding veto power over 20. This coordinated strangulation makes the cost of transit so high that even the USS George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group chose to sail around the Cape of Good Hope rather than risk the transit through the Red Sea. Open-source maritime tracking data from the firm Windward reveals the internal mechanics of how this blockade actually functions. Between July 20th and August 2nd, the data shows that 4 Saudi oil tankers were struck at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. During that same window, 22 vessels linked to Chinese ownership transited the same waters. Not a single one was touched. This selective targeting allows specific tankers to transit the blockade safely, provided they broadcast a Chinese destination on their transponders. Iran's closure of these waterways functions as a weapon with a selector switch. Western allies pay record insurance premiums and logistical costs, while China continues to source oil at a discount with no military risk. The superior military capacity of the United States remains idle because Washington is physically constrained by the architecture of its own alliances. In the Gulf, Saudi Arabia and the UAE face a structural trap. Their economies depend entirely on coastal infrastructure, sitting within range of Iranian missiles. They cannot support a U.S. strike without risking total economic collapse. In Israel, the governing coalition is trapped by conditions set by Hamas. Accepting a full withdrawal from Gaza would cause the government to collapse, making a negotiated peace structurally impossible for the current leadership. Because of these internal pressures, Israel has continued unilateral military operations that directly contradict American diplomatic efforts, showcasing a breakdown in strategic coordination. These contradictory alliance demands have left the U.S. Navy operating at the edge of its capacity. It is now struggling to maintain deterrence in the Gulf, support Ukraine, and patrol the South China Sea simultaneously. This state of paralysis was predicted 230 years ago in George Washington's 1796 farewell address. Washington warned against passionate attachments to foreign nations. He argued that a country consumed by such feelings becomes a satellite of its allies, participating in their quarrels rather than following its own interest. His fear was the loss of the right of independent deliberation, the ability for a republic to make sovereign strategic choices based on its own analysis. By August 2026, that warning has become a reality. The U.S. cannot act decisively because it is pulled in opposite directions by the conflicting survival needs of its regional partners. The result is a superpower that has retreated 10 times from the same adversary without receiving a single concession in return. While Washington celebrates these retreats as diplomatic progress, the adversary uses the downtime to expand its threat from 1 maritime choke point to 3. When a nation's alliances become the primary mechanism its enemies use to restrain it, strategic autonomy disappears. In the Middle East, the era of undisputed American deliberation has reached its conclusion.